Hey everyone, thanks for watching. It is Thursday, and that it means we speak with our experts, and Jonathan Twanley is back with us today. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm great, Michael. This is, as I said, one of my favorite parts of the week. So glad to be here.
I love it as well. We talk about real stuff, and what people may not realize is none of my expert interviews are scripted. We get on, we talk for 2 or 3 minutes, we go, hey, what do you want to talk about, and we just roll, which is something I appreciate. So, what we talked about today was a couple of topics. First is the notion. I'll just genericize it as rent strikes. We are seeing that communication ramp up both in residential and in business. So, want to kind of share what you've been seeing the last couple of days, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people probably have seen the rent strike, uh, movement amongst tenants, and they're emboldened by the fact that evictions are either on hold or the courts are closed, so functionally they're on hold.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also just a lot of resentment towards landlords out there in general, because rents are constantly going up, and people assume that means that the landlords are all swimming in money and they're greedy suckers. And the fact of the matter is that most tenants of residential property are, mom and pops who basically own a 2 or 3 family house, often that they live in, and it's one of their primary sources of income, or at least secondary source of income that they depend on. So it's not like they're like sitting on a beach on an island off the coast of Brazil, sipping tall drinks and just collecting checks. That's not really how it works, but I think that's the perception in a lot of people's minds. So there's been some movement amongst people who are of that mindset that, hey, we shouldn't pay rent. Let's have a rent strike, because the world is unfair. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know how much traction though these things are getting. Like, so far, what we're seeing is that at least through April, collections were pretty good. Like by month end, collections were reported as being in the 92, 93% range, which, I mean, let's put that in perspective. That means, 92, 93% sounds like, okay, great. They've made most of the money. What you have to understand is that that's top line revenue, right? Yeah. And if you're down 7% on your top line revenue, it means that bottom line, you're probably down anywhere from 10 to 15 or 14, 15% on the bottom line. Yep. And that is probably enough to mean that you're not really making any profit on.
No, you're making choices.
Property.
You are absolutely making trade-offs in residential. Yes.
So you were paying your mortgage,
for
and
sure.
You're paying your staff, and you're paying your expenses, and you're paying your taxes. But that's it. There's really not a lot left, unless you bought the property 30 years ago and you paid off your mortgage, and your expenses are really low. Like, if that's the case, then 92, 93% collections is pretty good. But if you bought the property in 2019 and at a 5 cap, like that you're basically kind of at break even at that point. So the good news, no collapse. Most people are not going into foreclosure yet.
Yep.
The bad news though is that now we have May, and we're going to see what happens, because in April people were paying based on their March paychecks.
Yes.
And maybe they had some extra money coming to them that they were due April 15th.
Yep.
So we're going to see, I think May is when the rubber is really going to hit the road. Now, there's been, if people, if they're not getting paid, or even, I know with unemployment benefits, sometimes there's a gap between
a lag,
when you apply and when you get it. So people may or may not have gotten their stimulus checks. And even if they have, how far does that go? Right. Yeah. So I think that we'll see in May. I mean, May will be a telling month, whether we'll see where collections are, because I don't think, honestly, even at the beginning of the month when everybody was reporting, 80% collections, and they were kind of celebrating it. I was like, 80%, a lot of landlords are underwater at
Yeah.
80% collections, right?
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah.
So if we'll see what happens in May.
Yeah. So as the residential guy on this conversation, my rent collection April to March was down 1%. Right.
Mhm.
So I collected 1% less in April than March. I think we had 3 tenants go unemployed, which they're not expecting their check until the first week of May. So they're down a month already. But again, we're working with folks, no late fees, all the stuff you would hope a landlord would do. I really think rent strikes in residential are more fodder for news medias to scare people and all of that. I just don't see it happening in mass today. I actually did a video on this like Wednesday or Thursday, or no, Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, because there's a New York building that I saw where they were putting up signs in the windows and say rent strike, rent strike, rent strike. And then when you peel back the logic, because they interviewed the person sort of coordinating it, is we want to force the government to do something. And I'm like, what? You're going to go on rent strike to hurt your landlord and you think the government's going to pay attention? And then when you peel it back one step further, they were basically saying, hey, not fair. Owner occupants are being helped and we're not, because of they're not understanding forbearance, or misunderstanding that forbearance is not forgiveness. And I'm like, oh my God, we're acting like fifth graders, right? At the end of the day, I think rent strikes in residential they're going to happen, no question. Like Vegas, they're going to be everywhere, I would suspect. But most cities, I don't think they're going to happen, because you need water, food, shelter. And I know if anybody went on, a rent strike in my area that could pay, I would just build the file. I would document the hell out of everything, and I would make sure that they were evicted whenever I legally could, because an eviction for a tenant that I serve will really limit their options for the next 3 to 5 years. And, if you want to play games with me, I can play games with you.
I think too that there's a lot of fear mongering around this. Right?
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's, and I see an agenda on the part of landowners or property owners also to say, look at these evil tenants. And definitely I see, like, within my group, my big Facebook group, there is a subset of the owners in that group who hate their tenants. Like,
oh yeah,
they just, they're just the way I feel about it is like, the tenants are paying for me to live. Yeah. So they're my customers. I have to value them. But there are a lot of people who their idea of their tenants is basically like a bunch of lowlifes who are trying to get over all the time, and they hate them. And so you see a lot of people there taking this very hardline attitude, like, what do you mean I can't evict these people? They're all lowlifes who are just trying to get over, and whatever. And I think there's a lot of scaremongering on either side. I have a feeling that those two groups are actually kind of the ones that are talking to each other.
Oh yeah, they're out this way on the deviation curve.
But what I mean is, like, it's like the tenants who are calling for rent strikes are probably the tenants of the buildings of the guys who think that their tenants are scum, right?
Totally agree.
So they're kind of like fighting it out, and the rest of the world is sort of, especially for really, I'd say most properties, but especially for those smaller properties that we're talking about before, like, if you live in a building with the owner, like you live upstairs and the owner lives downstairs. Yep. You are probably not out there hitting the streets for rent strikes, because like the owner is someone that you're friendly with. Yeah. Like, you see what they're going through. They extend courtesies to you. Like they know that. So you're probably going to try to pay your rent to that person because you have a relationship with them. Right. It's only, I think, where you see this springing up is with, like, in New York City, there are some notorious slumlords, right? Who buy these, low quality buildings. They put no money into them. That they don't perform service calls. People are living in squalor. It's like, it's horrible. They're living in horrible places because the landlords are trying to extract every single penny from. And so there are definitely people like that. But I think that is a very small percentage overall of the people who own rental property. The vast majority of them are mom and pops who own one or two properties, and
Mm-hmm.
some, like I said before, sometimes they live there. So
Yeah.
I think that probably to the extent that you're seeing these people out there protesting, they probably had a beef with this landlord already
Mm-hmm.
before this started, right?
Probably. Yeah.
And the rest of them, I think most people, we're seeing already, most people want to pay their rent. They'll pay it if they can,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully, like we've talked about before, sometimes it's actually the same people that I see posting who are very upset about how generous the unemployment benefits are. Right?
Yeah, exactly. What are you
Yeah,
doing?
because so like they're very upset about people getting, that some people are going to make more money on unemployment than they
Yes.
will working, and so I think, and those people are convinced because they think that their tenants are all scum. Those people are convinced that those people are going to be making more money than they were before, and they're not going to pay their
And they're not
rent,
going to pay me.
and
Yeah.
and they're just going to put it in their pocket.
Yeah.
And look, if there are people like that, then what you're doing, Michael, just by documenting everything,
Yeah.
people will have recourse eventually.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So you're going to be able to, those people who really are bad tenants or abusing the system, you'll be able to get rid of them.
Yeah.
When this all plays out. So I think there's just a lot of, as always, there's a lot of like fear mongering and emotion around these issues.
I just want to be clear about being a landlord of residential properties, in my opinion, right? I've had thousands of tenants by now. And as long as you have a tight box on who can move into your units, because that is your job, right? Your job is to take all these applications and say who can move in. So assuming you have a tight box there, or criteria, or whatever you want to call it, I say no to more than half the applications just for reference. 95% of my tenants are awesome. I love them. They pay rent. They operate by the rules. About 3% need to be reminded to pay rent, but they do. And then I have about 2% that sneak in, or life events happen and they just stop being good and they go the other way. I'm okay with that ratio. And I'm convinced after April that still holds true. And I'm sure it will be the same after May and June. And, we will see going forward. But as the landlord, your job is to control who you say yes to. And the ones that are complaining out here on the edges, I guarantee you they're saying yes to the first application that comes in. And that's not how you become a good landlord. But really about rent strikes, where I wanted to go, and where I really think rent strikes could take hold, is in office, in retail, in other parts of the real estate landscape. And I know you have some history in this area, or you've been reading on it. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I don't have any personal history in this, but I am, I have a lot of entrepreneur acquaintances, and I'm on some lists where people are discussing things. And what's been interesting to me is discussions around, should I be paying my rent or not for my office? And it's generated a lot of back and forth on these listservs, and the opinion seems to break into sort of three groups generally. So on the one hand, you've got the, you agreed to pay rent, you want to maintain the relationship with your landlord, you want things to pick up where they left off when this is all over. So just continue to pay rent, right?
Yep.
Then there's kind of a middle group, which is saying, try to renegotiate your rent now, either out of necessity because you really have to, or because like, hey, I'm a business person, I can take advantage of the situation to increase my bottom line, so I'm going to, because I know these landlords are under pressure. And then the third group is, don't pay a cent. Like, just don't pay, because you should be saving all of your cash. And, the hell with the landlord. And it's, what are they going to do? They're going to come after all their tenants at the same time and try to evict everybody at the same time. Like, your responsibility is to yourself and your business. So you shouldn't be paying a dime, especially because you're now not even allowed to go to your office. Like, you have this office that you're being forced to pay for that you can't even use. Now, I think there's a little, if you owned a storage space and you had all your stuff in your storage space, you'd still have to pay rent, even though you never go and unlock the door.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have an office full of stuff, right, you still owe the landlord money for storing all your stuff. but I understand the sentiment of like, hey, we can't even use the office. We're not even allowed to go and, pick up mail. And
Mm-hmm.
so why the hell should I be paying rent? I see the emotional logic to that, but if there's a such thing as emotional logic, but but anyway, so those are the three
Yeah.
broad groups I see this breaking into. Um, and it's quite, I was frankly was a little bit surprised when this debate broke out, because I didn't think that that business owners would be talking in the same way that like some of the
Yeah.
rent strikers
Yeah.
are talking, but some of them are. And like then of course, like there's a couple of uh, management companies and landlords in the group too. And then so they pipe up and say, look, guys, we still have property taxes to pay, utilities to pay, mortgage to pay. Like,
Yeah.
if you guys aren't paying us, then we all go down, because,
Yeah.
but I think some of the more cynical business owners are thinking, well, yeah, you may go down, but as a leaseholder, I have a superior right of occupancy to this property. So it doesn't really matter who owns it, because my lease is valid, whether the city takes it over in a tax sale,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's foreclosed on and the note is sold to somebody else. Like, I'm here. You can't kick me out as long as I'm paying, you know, unless I breach the lease, you can't kick me out. And, um, and so they may not care. Of course, if they're not paying, then that actually
Yeah.
does give rise to
Uh,
them being kicked out. But I think what they're banking on, people like that, is like, hey, I'm gonna this is going to be a negotiation, right? So if I
Right.
don't pay, then when this all settles out and the courts are open again, and we know that there's going to be a huge, monstrous backlog of
Right.
eviction cases, like and you're going to have all these legal fees, then I'm going to say to you, okay, you know, forgive me the back rent, and I'll start paying you, or I'm going to pay you a portion of the back
Yeah.
rent. But I think that's how people are
Yeah,
gaming this.
again, it's anytime just if anybody wants to realize that real estate investing of all ilks is a people business, this is just another sign. It's not
Yeah.
about the building. It is a people business, and people, rightly or wrongly, can use what I'll call warped logic. And you got to understand it, right? I understand all three categories. I don't agree with it, any of them. Well, I agree with pay your rent because you signed a lease, but I don't necessarily agree with the other two, but I understand them, right? And again, we're talking about big businesses here. We're not talking about a single accountant that's leasing 800 square feet,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about big businesses because, again, I don't own any of this stuff, but I would treat them just like I would treat my tenants. If you're gonna operate in a way that takes advantage of a situation, that once we get through this, I'm going to do my legal rights to make sure that you're hurt going forward. I guess when you file an eviction on a business, does that follow that business around? Are you filing it on their EIN number, or how does that? I don't even know. I've never.
I assume so.
I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm guessing that it hits their business credit.
I think so.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Okay.
know, and also, I mean, people often have personal guarantees on
Ooh,
commercial
there you
leases,
go. Yeah.
right? So, and they have similar to, they have good guy guarantees and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
So, it probably
Yeah.
depends on the market whether you have those, but in a market that's very tight,
Yeah.
the owners can get a lot of personal guarantees on things. So, but sort of to your point about it being a people business, I mean, the same as with the slumlords
Sure.
who abuse their tenants. I mean, there here in New York City, there are property groups that have really good reputations as being like in the business community as being like really good to their tenants, and like they maintain their buildings really well, and they're they, the tenants look upon them favorably because
Mm-hmm.
they're
They
they're
do the
helpful,
right
good
thing. Yeah.
owners. They do the right thing. And there are groups and typically these groups can't get the same kind of rents, right? Because of their reputation and the way they maintain their buildings. But they do the slumlord thing where they like don't maintain the buildings very well.
Yeah.
They're horrible to deal with. And so even in the commercial realm, you see the same kind of division into like the owners that
Interesting.
do the right thing and the owners that are, really bad and have bad reputations. And so they're
Wow.
the ones who I think, people move into their buildings because they're cheap,
Right.
but then they get abused, and then even though they stop making that
Mhm.
calculation, like, oh, this is a crappy situation because the rent is cheap or they're
Yeah.
related to each other. They just start thinking, I'm paying all this rent and this landlord's horrible and hell, screw him. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's the same everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
do the right thing and you profit from it in the long run.
Yeah. What I'll say, we'll close this topic out is, this is going to be a short-term event in the scheme of your real estate investing career. Could it be 2? Could it be 4? Could it be 6 months? Sure, pick your time frame. But in the scheme of real estate investing, that's a heartbeat. Don't ruin your reputation over a couple of months, because that will follow you for years to come. So let's go on to a topic that I think is for me is more interesting. You shared an article with some folks that you and I both know. It basically was about investors in Dallas. And what I wanted to talk about this article was, there are going to be tremendous opportunities coming, but some of them won't ever hit the street, right? They won't be made available to the public, if you will. So what I want to talk about there is first talk about what that is, how it's done, but also encourage people to start networking with lenders and banks and the like, because you at least want to get a phone call about something that's coming down the line. So you want to kind of share what we're talking about?
Yeah. So there was an article in the Dallas Morning News the other day that was picked up by one of the real estate content aggregators that sends out email every morning, and this is from the 27th, so it's a couple days ago, and it says the headline is "Commercial property buyers are watching for deals following the pandemic. Investors say they'll be ready for opportunities created by the economic shakeout." And what they're talking about here is that there are going to be, I think, a lot of, unless this thing plays out in a different way than I think most people expect, with a very strong recovery, and we're back to normal. I think it's fair to say that there are going to be some properties that don't make it through this, right? Just as there will be some businesses, and there'll be going to be some businesses that don't make it. They won't pay rent. Those properties may not make it through this. And I think particularly in the office and retail space. But I think there'll be some in the multifamily space as well, but probably more so in the office and retail space, because they're just more sensitive to the economy.
No question.
And so what's going to happen is the lenders are going to have to take back those properties, or they're just going to put them into the non-performing loan pile, right? So they won't take them back because there are other problems associated with taking the properties back, right? For instance, there's just the money that's expended on the foreclosure proceedings. Then there is what's probably the bigger problem for banks, is that foreclosures drive the price down of property. So for every other property they own, they have to now mark them down on their balance sheets to market. And so that's probably the bigger problem, right? That they don't want to foreclose because it affects their whole balance sheet. So I don't know, Michael, this is, me, I always go off on tangents because I think of something that, I don't know if you saw this circulating around in the last few weeks, but there was there was an article about how the strength of the housing recovery since 2008 has been in large part because the lenders did not foreclose on all the properties that they could have foreclosed on. And the ones that they did foreclose on, they kind of dribbled out to the market very, very slowly so as not to depress the price. And had they actually foreclosed on all of the properties that were foreclosable, then there would have been massive supply on the market and prices would have been affected. And that would have affected, and the reason the banks did it was because they would have had to mark all their loans down to market. And they basically the banks would have been insolvent if they had
for sure.
So,
I did see that, and I actually lived through it. It became predictable. They would release on Mondays and Fridays. It would be, again, I looked at one market every day for 20 years, folks. So again, I mean, I still look at it every day. They released on Mondays and Fridays. It would always be about 20 to 40 properties. They would never release. I never saw more than 4 in one zip code. So they were being rather strategic. And this went on for like 18 months. And then it all changed. And that's when they started selling portfolios to big hedge funds. because one day I remember looking on a Monday, I think it was, I'm like, hey, where's the 20 or 25? I only see 3. And then by Friday, it was over. They never released again. I never saw it again.
Where were you looking? Where were you looking?
So at the time, I guess I was looking at a local MLS view. It was before Realtor, before Zillow, and all of that. They gave up a web page. So, yeah, I would look at the same searches every day for years, and it was repetitive. And then it wasn't. And then I think that's really about what's in that Dallas Morning News article is what they realized is I want to sell entire portfolios or books or whatever they call it in their speak to one person and call it a day. So they don't have to mark to market. Right. And I think they figured that out at least 12 months, maybe 14 months into this crisis. And I know that's what they're going to do again. That's what the Dallas article was for me. I was like, that's what happened. That's exactly what they're going to do.
So exactly. So this is what they're talking about. So these investors are now, lining up. They're getting their funds ready. Some of them are creating funds to buy non-performing loans, right? And either singly or in tranches, but they're going to be buying the paper rather than the assets, and then either restructuring them or foreclosing on them themselves to take over the assets or make them into reperforming loans.
Exactly.
So this is going to be, now I think that these opportunities will present themselves all along the spectrum, right? And it won't just be the big properties at the upper end that you can access. If you are an investor and you have capital or you can access capital, I think it's in your interest to start talking. If you don't, if you can't access millions, but you can access tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands between you and your network, you should start talking to those local banks in your community, the community lenders that keep these loans on their balance sheets, right? We're not talking about the mortgage, the mortgage originators who sell them onto Fannie and Freddie, but these local banks that, that are operating, they're doing, 5-year paper and on commercial deals or, or even longer ones on residential deals, perhaps. But I think there's a lot of small commercial deals that are going to be on their books that, 5 to 25 unit type stuff.
Yep.
And they're not going to want to foreclose, but if they do, they're going to want to sell it as quickly as possible because banks are not in the business of operating property.
Oh, God, no.
Right?
Yes. They
don't want to be in that business because they can't do it themselves. They've got to hand it over to a servicer. There's like a special servicer that they have to, that's got to get paid, property management, all this kind of stuff. So they don't want to deal with that. They're not in that business. They're going to want to get rid of that stuff as quickly as they can. The people that they're going to get rid of it to are the people that they already know, right? If you walk in there later on and say, hey, I'd like to talk to your REO officer about, REO stands for real estate owned, right? Or your NPL officer, your non-performing loan officer, right? If you go in there, a year from now in the thick of things, they're probably going to be deluged with other people just like you.
Yeah.
And they're not going to they're not going to pay any attention to you. The time to go in there is now. Agreed. And to start developing those relationships now. And chances are they have nothing right now, and that's fine because you're playing the long game here. You're not going to go in and just they say, oh, we got nothing, and you go, well, that's too bad. I guess that was a waste of time. That's not the way you have to think of this. You have to think of this as putting the word out now, developing those relationships. Don't just do it once either. Like you have to cultivate the relationship with people. And then here's the critical thing. The critical thing is that if at all possible, do not just walk into the bank and ask to speak to the person. You have to figure out a way to get a personal introduction. You got to figure out who this person is, which may take some doing, but you got to start asking around, making inquiries. Who is the NPL person? Who is the REO person at the bank? And figure out a way to get a personal introduction to that person. I mean, maybe if you're one of those people who, you have a good relationship with the bank teller, already, and that you're the person that, like you're really friendly with them, or you have a bank officer that you work with because you're a business owner, that's great if you've got that in already, right? But if you don't have that, you got to figure out how, whether maybe it's listed on the website, maybe it's not. There are ways of figuring out who these people are, right? Maybe there are, paid services that you can hire that kind of figure this stuff out. It may be worth investing a couple $100 in one of those things. Asking around in your community, talking to other investors, maybe they know this might be the time we're going to a meetup, could be helpful because those people may know who those officers are. You can get a name, maybe you can even get an introduction, but getting the name is important because then you can start doing things like plugging this into LinkedIn and figuring out how you're connected to this person.
Warm
right?
introductions. Yep.
Or even if you don't get directly to that person, take the bank, right? The bank name, put that into LinkedIn, see who you're connected to at that bank,
Yep.
that you can then get the first step in through a warm introduction, right? And then turn that person into a warm contact, then you get that person to make the introduction for you.
Yep.
So this is a multi-stage process perhaps, but this is going to be time really, really, the return on this effort, the ROE here is going to be very, very big, because if you can get into that inner circle of people who are known by the REO officer as a legitimate investor who can take over these deals, right? You are going to be in good shape. And honestly, this is like what I'm doing myself now. I mean, all you guys have been seeing me on the sidelines for a while, and maybe some of you have been saying, is this Jonathan Twombly guy?
Does he do anything?
Does he actually do anything? Because, he hasn't bought property for a long time and he sold everything. And what the heck is this guy doing? I'll tell you what I'm doing now. I am calling up lenders that I know and telling them, I know because I know already people have been talking about this. Some of these lenders, the borrowers are already coming to them proactively and saying, how do I get ahead of this issue? What do I do if I run into a problem?
Yeah.
I may need a restructuring. I mean, I frankly am salivating myself over the bridge debt, because this is where you're going to see things.
Yeah. Bridge debt, is bridge debt like 3 years or less?
Yeah. Typically 3 years or less.
Wow.
And it's usually, it can be like 100% leverage basically, right?
Really?
So,
oh my
well, yeah, because I mean, it's based on the after renovation value and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they do have to put money down to get the debt. They need skin in the game, but it's very, very high levels of leverage that you can get. Oof. And when those lenders go to refi, those borrowers go to refi into permanent debt,
no chance.
Either the value may have fallen, or they may not have been able to complete their renovations because of everything that's gone on, or because the rents weren't there. They couldn't get the rents, and whatever. There's a whole host of reasons why their prediction of the value in 3 years is not going to play out.
Yeah.
And they're going to be in trouble and they won't be able to refi. Plus, a lot of these bridge lenders themselves are going to be in trouble because their capital sources have dried up.
Yes.
So they can't, maybe they are just going to extend and pretend like you say.
Yeah, maybe.
But they may be under pressure to call those loans.
Yes.
Right. They may be, I think a lot of those bridge debt loans are probably callable also. Right?
Oh, for sure.
At any time, right? They can be called at any time. So if those bridge lenders are getting their own loans called, then they're going to be calling in their loans that they've extended. And so I've been talking to people already saying like, hey, you've got these assets coming up. I want to know about them when they come up. And I'm also going to actually, can I do a slight pitch for something right here? Do you mind?
Do it.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'm actually going to put this out because I'm going to start talking about this in my group as well. There's a very specific provision, very obscure provision in the Japanese tax code that allows Japanese investors, if they buy a building that's wood frame and more than 22 years old, allows them to depreciate the entire property in just 4 years. So,
wow,
this used to be available to everybody in Japan. The tax code has changed. It's now only available to corporations, right? Okay. So, basically, I'm working with a number of these investors who are going to want to be buying properties. And here's the catch: for them to get the benefit of this in Japan, they have to do it all cash, right? So,
oh shoot, wow.
So there are some very deep-pocketed corporate investors in Japan who are going to be looking to all cash transactions for buildings that are 22 years or older, so that's 1998 or earlier, that are wood frame, which basically most multifamily is wood frame construction, even if it's brick exteriors, right? It's wood frame.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
so to the extent that people are coming across deals where, somebody's in trouble with their, because their bridge debt can't roll over, they can't roll into permanent debt, they're getting foreclosed on, they need a workout, and they need a cash buyer to come and rescue them, email me, because
Yeah.
this is the kind of stuff I'm going to be looking for, up to $50 million in value. So,
Nice.
probably minimum size of 10 million, but just if
So
people start seeing this stuff,
10 to 50 million, wood frame, 1998 or earlier, call
Yeah.
Jonathan Twombly. How do you want them
Yeah.
to reach out? Email, I guess?
Yeah. Email me at my company, which is Two Bridges Management. Two Bridges Asset Management. So just you can Google Two Bridges Asset Management. I guarantee you that you won't hit anybody else. Two Bridges Asset Management, and you can just go and email me.
I'll put your email in the first line of the description of this video. I'll do that.
Yeah. Well, don't put my email out there, because I'm going to get a lot of spam.
Okay, never mind.
Go to my website and they can contact me through the form.
Perfect.
But
Done.
But that's the kind of stuff that I will be looking for over the next couple of years. So
that's crazy. 4 years. So $10 million, all cash.
And
they can write up and is it just linear? 2.5, 2.5, 2.5?
25%. Yeah. 25%, 25%. Yeah. So and here's the thing, they don't have all this, like, are you a real estate professional?
Yeah.
All that kind of crap. It's like, this just goes against income, right? So they can write all this depreciate for 4 years against corporate income. Now, it doesn't make sense for people to form a corporation just to do this, because it can only be offset against other income from that corporation.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So if you have an existing business that generates, revenue, in Japan, they can use this to offset that revenue.
I'm not sure this is relevant, but I always have to ask when I see unusual, I don't know if I want to call them tax codes or tax loopholes or whatever you want to call it. Any idea why they would create this one? 22 years, wood frame?
I think it's because in Japan, the buildings have traditionally been built to a 30-year lifespan.
Okay.
And I think they wanted to create an incentive for people to be able to sell older property. So they wanted to, like, have a market for that, because otherwise you're basically selling a property that's beyond its useful life.
Yeah.
And and then it becomes a disincentive to selling it, or the prices drop too much, and I think it gums up the market. I think that's probably what the thinking is. So I think what they figured is let investors buy these older properties, take this enormous depreciation down, and then they can tear it down and rebuild into something new, and and they'll keep the market going that way. But I think that
makes sense.
I think but the weird thing about it was that it was a lot, you do it anywhere in the world. It wasn't limited to Japan. That was the weird thing about it. But now,
okay, that's interesting. And then they took off steel, so no high rises. That's what that. For wood frame, probably 3 stories and below, probably.
Yeah, I think that's as high. Although I have seen some buildings that are bigger, and of course, anything that's built now, they're using aluminum stud in a lot of cases, right? Not every case.
But again, 22 years, so okay.
Yeah, so basically you're talking 1990s construction.
Yeah,
there might be there might be a cap of 30 years old on this. I'm not sure. So there might be kind of like a really narrow window. Yeah. So really specific kind of era of property that's eligible. But as I said, if you
find one, call me.
And I'm not just talking about like any deal. I don't want people calling me with like stuff that's on LoopNet. I don't want people calling me with like stuff that some broker has sent them. What I'm talking about is if you know of a borrower who is in a sticky situation and the building fits this criteria, then I want to know. Or if you were in a sticky situation and you own a building that is in a position like this, then we may have an opportunity to talk about this. So that's
cool.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's always fun. Can you believe I just closing this out that I think it was 3.8 million new unemployment claims. So we're on a downward trend. You can be happy about that, but the total's 30 million now.
Yeah, I didn't actually see that. And so I forgot that today's the day they released the
3.84.
Yeah. I mean,
million.
Obviously it's on a downward trend because I think we're running out of people to lay off. Right. But look, the good news is that I think we may be bottoming out on that, and you're starting to see some reopenings.
Yeah,
Like I
signs
know
of
that
reopening. Yeah.
in New York they have let construction workers go back to work.
Ah, good.
So which is good. I think, you know, they figured those guys are all wearing respirators anyway, and they're not generally not working on top of each other. They're
Yeah,
usually
they're not
spaced
in a
out.
confined office space with ACs spreading this stuff around. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think so they've let them go back to work. I think, you know, they're targeting May 15th to start reopening in New York City.
Cool.
We seem to have maybe peaked with cases, so I don't know.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think, you know, the other thing that people should be mindful of though is this is probably going to come in waves. Like we're not going to be done with it this year. If you look at like the Spanish flu, I was looking at a graph of the Spanish flu this morning, and that was kind of scary because the first wave was like a little lump, and then the second wave was like this huge spike the
I
next
looked at
year.
it too. Yeah.
And then the third year was like a little lump again, and then it trickled off.
Yeah.
And so I think that people have to be prepared for this to come back, and I hopefully, you know, our leaders will figure out a way to open up as much of the economy as possible while still keeping people safe, so that it doesn't, because
we
look,
can't do this again. We just can't. Yeah.
We can't do this again, but we also can't have the thing spread like wildfire, because that will shut down the economy too. Like if people just don't want, if people decide like, hey, I don't want to get sick, well, I don't want my kids to get sick or my parents to get sick, you know, like they're just not going to go out, you know.
True.
So it'll affect the economy one way or the other. I'm hopeful that taking this radical action will have compressed that time that the economy is affected.
We'll see.
You know, we'll see. We'll see.
All right, man. This is always fun. I appreciate it. You have a wonderful week. All right.
You too, Michael. Take care.
Yep.